Well, good to see you all today and all the different locations you're joining us from. As we approach another election season, we know that political topics can become a significant source of tension. So at the Inclusive Institute, we actually thought of this topic as something that's really relevant, not only in society at large, but also within our workplaces. The topic of polarization due to politics tends to become a factor that can either bring people together or really pull you apart. Today, we're here to discuss some strategies that leaders, HR professionals, and DEI practitioners can use to navigate these challenges effectively. Our goal today is to provide you with actionable insights on fostering an environment that respects political diversity and encourages constructive dialogue. So what we'd like to also know is if you've come here with an expectation. So let's say you've joined this webinar and you would like a question answered. Please put that in the chat so we also know if we are actually addressing your concerns, and feel free to use the chat function throughout the call. We will have a Q&A at the end. There's about 10 minutes where you can ask your questions. But in the meantime, if you do have any concerns, any questions, if you'd like us to elaborate on a point as well, please put that in the chat button. Great, let me start by introducing our speakers for today. First, we have Jörg Schmitz. Jörg is an organizational anthropologist. He is also the managing director of the Inclusive Leadership Institute, and he specializes in transforming and optimizing organizational culture through inclusive leadership and DEI initiatives. He has nearly 30 years of experience in advising leaders globally to create agile, thriving cultures, and he has also authored several books on cross-cultural management and inclusive leadership. Welcome to the call, Jörg.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Great. And joining you, we also have Christine Campion-Green. Christine is a senior consultant with over 18 years of experience in talent and leadership development, specializing in DEI coaching and transformational change. She takes a people-first, data-driven approach to optimize organizational culture and drive measurable results with a background that includes leadership roles at Dow Jones, HBO, and Goldman Sachs. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and to talk politics.
Okay, yeah, and also I think, it's a heavy topic, but we don't have to approach it that way. Also at the Inclusive Leadership Institute, we adopt an anthropological approach to addressing challenges. This means that we examine cultural, social, behavioral dimensions that influence how people interact within a given context. So you'll notice that our way of talking also is very relatable. We approach things from a very bottom-up approach, and this is actually just going to be a conversation. And then you'll also notice that there is a bit of structure. We are talking also about strategies and practical tools, and we'll highlight some of the strategies that you can hopefully take away and use in your workplace. So let's dive right into the topic. Jörg, I'll hand over to you. Maybe you can start us off by framing the challenge of political polarization and also give us the context for today's webinar.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. And that's, of course, a big challenge. And I'll try to be a little anthropological about it as well. But I can't, just how Christine said, let's talk politics in a way. We are 19 days away from the election, and probably many of us are counting. And in the background, by the way, I put there pictures of institutions, political institutions that I am connected to through my own biography, right? So there's the US represented, there is Germany represented, there is the European Union represented, and there is also India represented there, because for many reasons I'm very much connected to India, and I also, as an overseas citizen of India, I couldn't just kind of ignore the Indian context to politics as well. But the US election is, of course, a highly significant event, not just in the United States, but also around the world, with all the repercussions and the signaling value that the US election has in so many other societies around the world. So I think I just want to, while obviously many of us cannot vote in this election, but we recognize the importance of this election and probably feel personally and through friends and our communities and so forth, how polarizing the current situation is. And politics hasn't always been that polarizing. So sometimes it has, sometimes it hasn't. This is not unique in human history, but we are certainly in a significant period, where politics, especially in Western democracies, is entering a different stage. And we resonate with that. We feel it, we experience it, and that's why we need to talk about it probably. But I just want to make a couple of other comments. The first one is that at the Inclusive Leadership Institute, we focus on groups. Some people may think we focus on individuals as leaders, but actually we are really focused on groups and group dynamics, because as human beings, we are first and foremost social. And that takes place in different social units and configurations, in societies, in communities, in institutions, in organizations, on our teams, right? And that's why we focus on our social contexts and what is happening in those social contexts. Now, I want to say that groups are political entities. Groups are by nature political. And we can tell each other that they are not. We can tell each other we shouldn't talk about politics or so, but we operate in groups, and groups have a politic, just the way that the original word of the meaning of the word politics suggests. It's about governance. It's about how we make decisions together, how we distribute vital resources, power, authority being some of them, how we create a collective identity, what we value together, who we are together. And I think when we're talking about polarization, Jeremy, the idea is that we feel a certain threat. We feel that cohesion, that belonging together, threatened in some ways. We don't recognize the old way of being social together, and we feel that we are at risk of losing something, especially in polarized times. And because as groups we are social, it's probably not a surprise that DEI and what I would generally call the culture wars, play such a significant role when we are thinking about the meaning of politics in groups, right? Because DEI is so much around kind of examining how we make decisions, how power is distributed, how we experience different things, who the different constituencies are. So, I'm not surprised that DEI is a particular tension point for the current political climate in the US and beyond, by the way. So we're not just talking about the US. And of course, that all against the backdrop of specific social histories, right? So, and people are trying to make meaning out of this. And so when we talk politics, as Christine said, we're doing that in this kind of context where we feel a heightened significance to the election coming up, because our social system, more broadly, is under a significant amount of stress. And the stress is not just political, it's also because overall we are finding ourselves in this polycrisis, this environment of polycrisis, right? Economic, environmental, social challenges are all pulling at us and our social ways of being social in order to transform ourselves to a significant challenge. And all of that is very anxiety producing, right? Fear and anxiety are all over this, and we may feel it ourselves. And this is the link to the workplace, by the way, because we take that anxiety and that worry into the workplace. And perhaps in other elections, just when we think about the election coming up, in other elections, it was okay because it wasn't as emotionally charged and anxiety-ridden. This one is different because we are in a different context. And that's why I think we need to talk about it.
I'd like to pick up on the anxiety, the uncertainty. There's definitely fear. And also, politics at workplace is generally a taboo topic, or we've been told it's a taboo topic, right? So people already have the lens that this is not something you can discuss freely at the workplace. In fact, let's avoid the conversation in the workplace. And
Right.
it almost seems like that's counterintuitive. That's not really helpful. So how do leaders engage with that topic? And should leaders engage? And is there a good reason why leaders should engage with this discussion in the workplace?
I think, I mean, and I'm really curious to hear from whoever is dialed in. I don't think there is a clear-cut answer, right? I mean, it is taboo the way other topics are taboo, right? Religion, sex, sexuality has been historically taboo. I think, to make reference to my earlier comment around DEI has a way of actually breaking taboos, and examining norms, including taboos, which make DEI really challenging for people. But I think the taboo around politics comes from a good place. The taboo is saying if we address politics, it will tear us apart, right? I mean, that's the worry around taboos. Somehow, it will tear us apart. I think in this current moment, it tears us even more apart when we create a taboo around politics. And I think we need to, and maybe we can examine this. And Christine, I feel I've been talking too much, but I think the thing around politics at the current moment, and when we are talking about should we bring politics into the workplace, doesn't mean that we now talk about the content of politics, that we now all declare who we are voting for and who we are not voting for, or what our political orientation is. We can, but we should recognize that the politics around us has an impact on us, impacts us. And we feel frightened, we feel threatened, we feel whatever we are feeling around it. And that's affecting our community. That's affecting our team, our workplaces, especially when society is so highly polarized. And I'll just mention one quick thing. And at the conference board where you spend some time in a DEI role, we actually discovered many years ago that organizations are increasingly taking the place of societal institutions, trusted societal institutions. All of a sudden, employees want purpose at work. They want cohesion at work. They want belonging at work. They are expecting the workplace and organizations to do things that traditionally the workplace didn't need to deliver, or had a portion in, but not the major role. So employees' relationships and expectations of workplaces have shifted as well. And if we don't factor all of that in and see that if our workplaces maintain a sense of cohesion when the external world is threatened, then at least here we can build a safe environment.
When you say that employees' expectations in the workplace are changing and that factor about wanting more purpose in their work, then the question also is, how does the leader's role change along with that shifting landscape? And I'd also love to hear from you, Christine, on why, maybe you have some thoughts about engaging with politics in the workplace. But before you jump in, just a quick note to all our participants. The chat function is disabled for this webinar, but please feel free to use the Q&A. And you can still interact with us, and I'll be monitoring that. So please let us know your thoughts and comments using the Q&A button at the bottom. And over to you, Christine.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. Jörg, when you said that the intentionality about it being taboo actually may come from a good place because people fear that division. The same is true that not talking about it, not acknowledging it, does actually contribute to the breakdown in our societies, our organizations, our relationships, our teams, and not acknowledging these realities is what can undermine our ability to build an inclusive and cohesive work environment. So I think for me, Jeremy, that's the call, that leaders are really being asked to step into this, recognize their role in creating that inclusive environment, because a leader's ability, the degree to which they can embrace this kind of messy, polarized place, is that it has a direct correspondence to the degree that they can cultivate an environment where people feel seen and where they feel supported in ways that maybe traditionally we didn't anticipate the workplace fulfilling. So absolutely. I mean, I think leaders are in a critical place. I think the reality is many leaders know that there's something we're not talking about, but they're sitting there going, I don't know what to do. And I'm afraid if I say the wrong thing, I might offend somebody, or, right? There's a lot of fear around how we need to act in this space. And I think part of what excites me about today is just for me, part of what I hope everyone gets out of this is just normalizing the fact that it is uncomfortable. And being able to just embrace that and say, listen, it is uncomfortable and it's really complex, and that's okay. So I don't know if I answered your question there or not, Jeremy.
No, that absolutely. And you said this thing about politics being messy. It is messy, right? But we need to somehow engage with that still. And Brenda actually made a point that she started a career in Argentina, and politics was actually a part of the workplace. And then there's also this note about cultural nuances and how different cultures approach this. I spent a lot of time in Australia, and people did talk about politics openly. But I then had American friends who would say, we're going for dinner, please don't bring up the topic of politics. Right. Not going to talk about that. But then you might go to France and they love talking about politics, and having discussions, I would say even arguments, heated arguments. So we also need to understand that, we're not talking about a one approach fits all. This idea of approaching politics is very nuanced. It really is based on history, culture, where you're from. So I think we're going in that direction of understanding as well that we may not approach this the same way based on different cultures.
Yes.
There are strategies that I think are universal. Yeah. And maybe we can move towards the more practical part of this webinar as well, where we discuss a few strategies. And I know, Jörg, that you had this sort of 3-layered approach. Maybe you can introduce us to that?
Yeah. I will, but I can't help myself. I just need to make one quick point about what you just talked about, this taboo that doesn't exist everywhere. And this is such an important point, right? But what it also reveals that when we have made political conversation in the workplace taboo, we are not rehearsed in engaging with each other around different perspectives and opinions. And to me, that's core to not just inclusive leadership, but the whole idea of diversity and so forth, by the way. And the less rehearsed we are to engage around differences and build relationships across differences, the more when we are in heightened, polarized times, we don't have what we now need to strengthen the social fabric. Right, so but I mean, nevertheless, it has, in many workplaces, it is a taboo. It's a taboo to the place. I'll give you a practical example where, where there were political issues going on around in society, and I know leaders and executives who decided to turn the little TV screens that you find in elevators off. So almost to pretend, when we're here, we pretend the outside doesn't exist. And of course it exists, right? People bring it into the building. And it was a very weak response from leaders to not reflect and acknowledge what was happening on the outside that reverberated on the inside of employees. And by the way, themselves. And that's the 3 strategies we need to focus on. Namely, it is about, ourselves. Are we managing ourselves in this? And how am I implicated? How am I managing myself? What's going on for me? That's every leader has to start there, right? And then the second step is, how do we engage others around that current experience and the shared concern and worry that is underneath all of that? And then more broadly, how do we fortify and create an environment that is truly inclusive, and where inclusive also includes the dimension of our political diversity?
Christina, I think you wanted to say something, so I'll let you.
Oh, I was just going to comment, Jorg, as you were talking about some of the actions that people are taking, it's even thinking about like, okay, what does November 6th look like? Are we acknowledging that, our people will have stayed up all night? Are we as leaders giving our team the flexibility to work remotely if they need to, or giving them a sense of autonomy to say, listen, if you need to take a PTO day, do it. And also recognizing that on the 6th, we may not have an answer. And so how are we supporting people in this time where maybe there's living in ambiguity around the outcome of this decision? So I just think, and that's something that you had mentioned kind of triggered that. But Jeremy, to kind of talk a little bit about this first principle of managing yourself, I think, that is fundamentally the key place, because the more that you can connect to your personal experience, the more you can then connect to the experience of others, which Jorg mentioned is the foundation of inclusive leadership. And so that first step is really one to reflect. In these coming weeks, taking some time to think about, what are my real political beliefs? Where did they come from? Did they come because I inherited them? Maybe from my family? Maybe it's regionally because of where I live, right? Are there other things in my life that influence those beliefs? How have my beliefs evolved over time? And how have they evolved as my identity and values have changed, right? Recognizing that politics are not this monolith. They are pliable and they change and they shift. Thinking about, what triggers you? What are the things that really get your blood pumping? Why do they trigger you? Are there certain people that trigger you, right? What is it about those situations that really get you going? And then thinking a little bit around, how do my political beliefs actually impact the way that I lead? How does that show up? That doesn't mean that I'm necessarily there touting my political affiliation, but, if I'm somebody, and I'll just use a very U.S. context, but independence, right? How does that show up in the way that I lead? Does that mean that I kind of let people just figure it out and maybe I'm not as hands-on, right? So just reflecting a little bit about that. And then I also think it's really important to think about how your political narratives show up. How do you make other people feel in those conversations? How do you trigger other people? All of these things are a really, really important piece to reflection. And Jorg, I saw that you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I couldn't help myself even thinking one thing to reflect on is actually our own relationship to our political orientation and affiliation. Some have a very weak relationship or identification with politics. Some have a very strong identification with politics. So how am I identified around politics, and where does that come from? And this is, I think, the danger in polarized times, where we also exist in different media bubbles that reinforce whatever we might be believing or so. And that's well worth kind of examining as well. But where we see the other as enemy, not as and that's of course the danger of polarization, where the politically other is not just somebody who sees the world differently, who has a different value system, who might, make different decisions from I make, or values things relatively differently, and I can learn about that, and it enriches my own thinking and understanding of the world. We have, in polarized times, we have kind of categorically put some walls up there.
Yeah.
And I think our job is to lower them a little bit. And the first step is what you just mentioned. I think examine ourselves.
And I'll share a comment and then maybe expand on this a little more. And part of that reflection is even, am I willing? Am I willing to listen?
Yeah,
am I willing to learn? So there's a little bit of humility that needs to go into this as well. And I think the core practice in reflection is also being able to, engage with your own observations in that non-judgmental way. So whatever comes up, if you realize, you know what, actually, I am very angry, and just noticing that, not judging it as right or wrong or better than or more evolved than or, Democrat or Republican, because it is that judgmental space that actually puts us right back into that polarized dynamic. And, when we're judging ourselves and others, we will end up in this infinite dance of push and pull, right? I think each and every one of us can relate to the experience of, having a conversation with somebody and feeling like their view is being pushed on you. The natural reaction is to simply push back. And if that is the dynamic that we are stuck in, it's a perpetual thing. You're never going to get out of that if you are in a place that is, judgmental, judging yourself and others. And so I think part of this, in addition to that reflection in a non-judgmental way, is also about being able to engage with whatever you may find in a compassionate and curious way, right? That's this learning piece, the learning element to it that says, hey, I know I'm human. I don't have this all figured out. I know I have blind spots. I know I have things to learn here. So what am I learning about myself? Oh, I can say this. I've learned I'm quite stubborn. But oh, okay. So what does that mean, right? And when am I like this? And with whom am I like this? You engage with your own internal experience in this kind of distant way that allows you to get out of the grip of emotion, right? And I think, again, the more that you do this for yourself and connect with your own internal experience, it will only then impact how you relate to others, right? Because you realize like, oh, I'm digging in because I feel really fearful. Oh, okay. Maybe somebody on the other side is fearful of losing something too. And so now we create that bridge of understanding. We may be fearful of different things, but at least we understand that we are connecting through the experience of fear. And that is a shared place and a place where we can, cultivate respect and understanding of difference. So I don't know. Now I'll get off my
that's
or the stairs
perfect.
or the stairs of the Capitol.
Yeah.
Let me summarize what I've said. I think what you were saying is first, you reflect, leaders do lead by example.
Yeah.
We're starting off, and it's kind of ironic that we are discussing strategies and people would probably expect policies and procedures in the organization, but we're actually doing this sort of inward, almost like a reflection piece that leaders should, that's where you start, unless you're able to accept the understanding of your own journey with your beliefs and your values. And unless you accept yourself, you're not going to be able to accept the differences that others present. And that's where you also mentioned the triggers, right? And this is what usually happens with these kind of conversations and polarizing conversations, as you feel that trigger, and instantly, like you said, there's a push and a push.
Yeah.
it's sort of the push and the pull. When someone says something that triggers you, it's really difficult to say, oh, tell me more about that. I'm curious. You really
Yeah.
want to say, no, I disagree with that. And here's my opinion.
Right.
And
Exactly. Exactly. And you can feel that physically in your body, right? You feel that happening. And so I think part of this is reflection, right? But the action that you're being asked to take then is to actually manage that.
Mhm.
And so how do you manage that? I mean, these are things that you can learn around stress management techniques. Actually, just noticing, just observing yourself, actually, we know from neuroscience increases that prefrontal cortex and increases your ability to manage your behavior in the moment. So just even noticing your behavior actually increases your ability to choose differently in the moment. But other things, taking a step back for a moment, right? Recognizing that you're triggered, breathing, we know, standing up, moving your body. So knowing, I mean, I think that's another strategy. It's around reflection. It's managing your own internal stress, right? And practicing those things are also key to this. And then I think the next piece to this kind of managing yourself, and then Jorg, I'm going to hand it over to you, or just a few more things. It's as a leader, I think one of the boldest and most humble things that we can do is actually connect our experience to the wider experience and normalize that for people.
Mm.
And so what does that mean? It's the giving voice to it to say, listen, I've been doing some thinking. Here's what I learned about myself, right? Here's what I learned I'm good at. Hey, I'm really good at engaging in political conversation when it's with people who are like-minded. And I'm not so great in these situations, right? Being in that vulnerable space, does a couple things. One, it normalizes this whole area. And it's also a demonstration of vulnerability. And when we are vulnerable, especially as leaders, with our teams and with our colleagues, it has a direct impact on the psychological safety that people feel. And there's a lot, psychological safety is a bit of a buzzword at the moment, but it communicates, hey, this is a safe place for you to reveal a little bit more of yourself without judgment. And again, remembering that as a leader, you can sit there and say, you know what, this is uncomfortable. And I'm not sure exactly what the right way forward is, but let's talk about it and let's figure that out together. So I'll now give it back to you.
No, but I think, if we can embody that as leaders, right, and bring this to our teams, we're probably doing we're taking a really important step to creating that psychological safety. And of course, we know leaders who haven't done that, who feel terribly uncomfortable with that, and they need to learn that. And we also know leaders who have done this and who lead this way, and therefore it'll be easier even through this political period and up to the election and after the election. I think a couple of principles are really important. The leaders resonate with the experience of the group that they are leading or within which they are leading, right? And they narrate that and their own experience, and therefore through the narration they're creating coherence within a group, right? These are, this may seem like esoteric concepts, like to resonate and to build coherence through a narrative. But I think this is essentially the craft of leaders. And using our own experience as a gateway into that is so fundamental. Of course, we need to do this non-judgmentally, and we need to do this recognizing that our own experience as a leader is just one of the experiences, and especially in polarized political times, wherever I am, there is somebody who's going to be similarly emotionally charged, but on a very different side, right? And I need to invite that in, even when everything in my body and thinking resists that.
Yeah.
And the ability is opened up when we activate our inner observer, or what I sometimes call our inner anthropologist. The person, this part of us that just observes us and what is happening, and observes what is happening around us, and narrate that.
Yeah. And I think the key there, Jörg, is it doesn't take a long time to do, right? It could just be a simple comment in a team meeting that sounds like, hey, this is a really stressful time. And I recognize that, this may be impacting all of you in big, small, different ways. And so my ask of you is that, if you need flexibility with your work schedule, that you let me know. That's an example of narrating, right? And so it's not this long novel that you have to craft, but rather finding these key moments to be able to connect to that experience.
And it doesn't take a communications department to write a script, right?
No.
It's just, and that's the voice that we need to, our own authentic voice that we need to activate there.
Yeah.
I think there are a few other things we can add to this. Yeah. And so, especially in these times, if we can activate that inner observer, if we bring that into our groups and our teams, now we are engaging others in this, right? That's kind of, we are connecting the first step, ourselves, to now others. We become the gateway to others, not a slide, not a ready-made communication, which organizations may also prepare. And the situation is, of course, different right now as we are building up to the election to what will happen after the election. Because we have two fundamental situations after the election where one group of people will be heavily grieving and the other group might be triumphant. That's one outcome, whichever group that is. And again, our job is to acknowledge and resonate with both of those feelings and narrate that in order to connect the group, the team, the organization somehow. There is another possibility, is that we are, especially because of the situation as it is, that the election won't yield a satisfying outcome where we know who won or didn't. Right? That's a real possibility here. And that will put everybody everybody then will be in a much more anxious, heightened state of arousal. Mm-hmm. Our job, again, as leaders, is to narrate that, acknowledge that, and and create cohesion around that. And it starts with just simply acknowledging it. That's not enough. Psychological safety, as you said, Christine, I think also needs to get anchored by specific ground rules. Just how we talked about creating narrative of a leader to create cohesion, at least some level of cohesion, as much as is possible. Ground rules help us do that as well. Right? We need to simply acknowledge in those ground rules, and the ground rules need to be contexted, not like ground rules that sometimes we use in meetings and then they get ignored or we forget them right away. They need to be meant. As leaders, we are the guardians of those ground rules, and they need to be contexted by our resonance with why we need those ground rules in the first place. Saying things like what Christine said, this is difficult. This will bring up all kinds of difficult topics and situations, and that's okay. We can handle that, right? And because we can handle that, these ground rules help us handle that. So this is now a leader, crafting the narrative around who we are in these trying, polarized political times. We, as a group, we can maintain our level of cohesion here, and our ground rules will help us do that.
When you talk about ground rules, can you maybe mention some examples of companies that have done this that you think are good examples? I know that some companies have policies where they have 5 statements, and they said, this is how we will communicate. And for me, that's a ground rule. That's something that's set right from the start. And you know how the company as a whole communicates.
Right.
Is there an example that you can think about where someone set these ground rules? Maybe from the start, or maybe because they went through a change process and then said, look, we need to establish some ground rules.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's always hard to put companies to these things, because companies in and of themselves are highly heterogeneous cultural environments, right? I think what is key to what you said, Jeremy, is that companies have policies or they have values. And of course, those are the things that we now need to anchor to, that leaders should be pulling from. But oftentimes they don't, right? We forget that we have those values, or we default, we hide behind the official statements and communication that goes out. And we forget that it is us, the way we take this to our team, into our environment, the way we make this real, that will send a message to our people, whether this is just the corporate stuff, whether we actually mean this, right? So the corporate communication cannot compensate for what we need to do as leaders in this moment. And many leaders think the corporate stuff substitutes for my leadership.
Mm-hmm. And
That's I think that's the first thing. Sorry, Christine.
Sorry, Jörg, I'm interrupting. I just was going to add, I think too, people over rely on it because they're afraid. Again, they're afraid they might offend. They don't know what to say. They don't know, so they just default and avoid.
And what are these ground rules? I mean, we can talk about this, right? And they are anchored in most of the people that are dialed in here work for an organization that has values and ground rules. And I believe the things we need in our ground rules, are already anchored by those values, even though they're very different. And I don't know what yours are in your organization. But something very simple that people need to practice right now is listening more deeply. Practicing what Christine said, curiosity with compassion, and that's an inclusive leadership practice, right? Compassionate curiosity. Mm-hmm. And that means that we are not waiting here. If you're telling me something about what is important to you and that has shaped your political conviction, that I'm here now ramping up my counter argument to why you are wrong, right? This means now that I'm sitting here thinking about, Christine thinks this way or believes this way. I wonder why. Mm-hmm. Why are you taking this course of action? Why are you advocating for this? Why are you, why is this important to you? I'm just curious. And when we can connect around our shared curiosity, we are building bridges, even around the most difficult divides. Mm-hmm. And this is, and we need it the most. Everybody will now say, yes, I'm curious, I'm naturally curious or whatnot. But there is a condition that needs to be met to become curious, right? That and safety and curiosity go hand in hand. But it's oftentimes we need the curiosity as a tool, as a strategy more when we are emotionally least inclined to be curious. So curiosity is one of those muscles we need to practice and apply it, especially when it's most difficult. It's easy to be curious otherwise. It's in those times where we need our curiosity. And we need to our ground rules need to tell that to people. This is the time to be curious. We will practice this together. I, as a leader, will be the guardian of these ground rules.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to say that you're just emphasizing the importance of making sure that people adhere to them. And that may be these, rules around, being curious, but also those organizational policies. If people are getting on Zoom and they have political signs behind them, right, and it goes against your company policy, as a leader, making sure that you're taking that person aside and saying, listen, this goes against our policy, or just interpersonal rules around comments, right? I think that's the trickier space. People are in a meeting, they make a one-off comment here or a one-off comment here. As a group, creating an agreement that says, listen, we agree we are going to refrain from any political commentary that has to do with our affiliation. And that is, creating that as part of your ground rules and enforcing that is really important.
That's really great. I'm just keeping an eye on time, and we also have some questions. I've actually got 4 or 5 questions lined up. So I want to make sure I have enough space for those questions as well.
Right.
But really like to hear, we've talked about leaders managing themselves. Then we moved on to engaging with others. And those are some really practical strategies and some tools that you mentioned here. But then when you move to the third layer, which is really about building and fostering that inclusive environment, I'd love to hear your thoughts on some strategies here that would work. How does a leader go about doing that, or already tapping into what's existing? And I really like your piece about values. We also had a comment from one of the participants about using firm values and how that plays in a key role in this conversation. So, finding the common ground through those values, but also that curiosity leading to that point where you find the common ground.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's now you've started engaging others, but I'm really curious to also know what you would say about that third piece, which is that environment that you have to create, which is inclusive.
Yeah. Christine, do you want to go first? Or?
I mean, I have lots of thoughts.
Sure, I know. That's fine.
Thanks, Jeremy, for summarizing that and kind of helping us to keep track on our conversation here. I think when it comes to the environment, what comes up for me is first and foremost, as a leader, part of the narrative that you need to create is that your goal is to support physical and emotional well-being. Their safety, physical safety, is key. It is the foundation. And so, I think as we go into this election season, rather, there are a lot of people wondering, what is the world going to look like on November 6th? Is it going to become the new January 6th? We don't know. And so as a leader, making sure that part of your message is that you trust and you're empowering your team members to be able to make decisions for them and their families that prioritize safety and well-being. Again, so that means, hey, it's normal not to feel your best. Take the day, right? So I think that's key, and I think the other thing, and you can probably talk to this a little bit more, is just creating those safe spaces for people to come together to share what's happening for them, creating that space when you can encourage others to reflect on their experience and what they're going through. I know as part of ILI, part of this series, some of the things that we're going to be doing is offering listening circles, both before the election and after, as a free-form conversation. There is no agenda other than this is a space for us to come together, to talk through our experiences, share things that we're struggling with, and to do it in a way that's supportive regardless of affiliation. So, for me, those are probably some of the key things: is physical well-being, allowing that flexibility and for people to choose what's right for them, and then being able to kind of create those safe spaces.
And, I'm now at risk of talking about a real, kind of a pet topic that I have that I think is underutilized by many leaders and in organizations, which is rituals, right? And this may not be management or leadership speak, but rituals serve a particular purpose. It's part of our social technology, if you will, even though I really don't like to call it a technology or whatnot. But earlier I said it's about us being social, and as human beings, we use rituals in societies in order to help us through specific things, help us through change, to solidify our social cohesion, to give us a sense of validation that we can come together. Rituals are oftentimes used for healing, right? Social healing, which we will probably need around this political divide. Rituals help us repair. Rituals help us to transform into a new way of being. They take us on an emotional journey that is highly scripted oftentimes. People know exactly what to expect of a ritual. And there is usually a very powerful personal experience connected to that when they're done well. The leader, in a certain sense, now can officiate. This is, again, not the usual management or leadership language, but a ritual. I'll create a ritual for a group, for a team, where they know, okay, this is about creating some repair, because we need to repair the fabric of who we are, connecting each other and ourselves to ourselves as a group. Now, these rituals can have different forms. It doesn't have to be elaborate. The most important thing is that they feel authentic, that it's not some, something, but it's something that happens periodically, like these listening circles. Why do we don't need to do it just for the election. We should be coming together periodically and sharing what's going on for us, where everybody has an equal voice, where everybody knows they're being listened to, that their experience is reflected in some ways. And if we create environments like that as leaders for our teams in our organizations, if we expect our leaders if we expect that of other leaders, if we are that CEO or a C-suite executive, then we are doing a tremendous justice to actually living the values that we probably hold. And one more comment on values. Values are so critical, and yet they're oftentimes too general. Usually they say collaboration, teamwork, or something like this. But ground rules or guiding principles, we need to exist so that we know how to actually live those values and put them into practice. And I've seen this in so many organizations that have great values. Some of them live in reality. Some of them are entirely aspirational, which means they are not there yet. And the way to align ourselves to those values is through some guiding principles that help us navigate this. So rituals and guiding principles, and maybe those ground rules, somehow need to coexist. And as leaders, we need to figure out, what ritual can I create that is a repetitive way of connecting our experience to one another, stitching them together.
And Jörg, I know we're up against time, but even just, I don't know, if you can maybe articulate what a ritual might look like. Like, my brain goes to, like, as a leader, creating a ritual for the team around world events. So as things happen across the globe, right, do we have a ritual as a team that says, how do we check in on somebody who's located in a place where maybe there's conflict or there's a hurricane, or right? Like, creating that
Yes.
for us as ourself. It, again, doesn't have to be big, doesn't need to take a lot of time, but the impact is so significant. So just thinking a little bit about what are some examples of rituals that could be helpful this time.
And you mentioned one. It could be a simple format in having a weekly, bi-weekly meeting where there's a format. Everybody gets a few minutes to talk about, it's kind of like a collective check-in, for example.
Yeah.
It's not just one-on-one, but it's collective, because doing this together is actually really important to this. This is a good example of what a ritual could look like and how we can bring this and make this happen in a group. It's even more important when we're working virtually or in hybrid scenarios, where we lose so many opportunities every day to actually truly connect to what's going on for you. How do you feel? And really calibrating emotionally with one another.
So I'm going to respect our time schedule as well. So I'll save the summary for the end. But really, what I'm hearing is this piece about rituals being really important to build that inclusive culture, and not enough attention is being paid to it. But there are some really creative ideas, and I've seen companies do this already. So we actually have studies where companies have really tapped into this. And Christine, you mentioned we also are creating a safe space. So, this is already a ritual that we're starting, that people can come in and just share your thoughts, reactions, experiences quite freely without any judgment. That's a ritual that I think is really powerful. In our last couple of minutes, we do have a few questions, and I'll pick at least one to start with. But before I do that, I just want to also inform all our participants that we've recorded this session. We will send you a summary, and we will actually list out these strategies in a way that's easy for you to follow. Thanks for bearing with us, and we will have that sent to you shortly. But going to the question part, one of the questions that was asked was about firm values. And the question was, are firm values themselves becoming political? So this idea of inclusion for all, is that itself becoming controversial? And what would you say to that?
Well, it is to the same degree that anything that is somehow connected, associated with culture wars and DEI or whatnot, it has become polarizing and political. But I would say there is a way of actually, now is the time to demonstrate what we really mean by that. Right? Now is the time not to be defensive. And it puts, it now actually puts every DEI function or inclusion or inclusiveness to the test. Is it really inclusion for some? Or do we actually mean this as a value? Here is a great opportunity. Our political diversity is a great opportunity to demonstrate that we mean this as a value that is not political, even though it may be politicized.
Christy, any closing thoughts?
I can't get better than that.
That's a really good place to wrap up. Thank you both for this conversation. Thank you for sharing your insights. Thank you to all our participants.
Thank you for anyone who attended.
We'll let you know what's coming up at the Inclusive Leadership Institute as well, so you can join further conversations. I feel like, especially that rituals part, we could have a whole spin-off series just based on that.
Just on that, that's right.
Yes.
So thank you very much for joining us. And we hope to see you soon at one of our upcoming events. And thank you so much for your time today. I think we're right on the clock at the 1 hour. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Christy.